This episode is brought to you by Meow Wolf. Because Danceportation returns to Meow Wolf Denver on Saturday, June 1st, with a takeover by Jay Wara. And they've got even more killer DJs to announce soon. Don't miss this rare cosmic dance party pulsing through all 4 floors of Convergence Station. You know, when I was tripping out about reading this, Paul, it was like, there are 4 floors. It feels like there's like 10. Tickets are on sale now. Visit meowwolf.org to get yours. That's meowwolf.org. Floors are not a concept that I have once I step inside Meow Wolf. Today on CityCast Denver, all parking lots were not created equal. But in a city of terrible lots, which ones rise to the top as the worst? And why are they so bad? Denver Post Neighborhoods reporter Megan Ululani Boyanton went on a mission to find out what's up and gain some interesting insight into how Denverites view our abysmal parking situation. Today is Monday, May 20th. I'm Bree Davies, and here's what Denver's talking about. Megan Ululani Boyanton, welcome back to CityCast Denver.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
So before we start the ranting, I want to know what made you want to dig into Denver's parking lot problems.
I think it was enough of my own personal bad experiences trying to park at my local grocery stores. I frequent the Trader Joe's on Cap Hill. I also go to that nearby Safeway and the Whole Foods in Cherry Creek occasionally. And I remember once circling the lot in Cherry Creek and there was construction going on. I was just like, this is madness.
Like, what am I doing? Do I need groceries that bad? Maybe I don't.
Right. Well, and then you just have to leave because you're like, okay, I guess there's no parking. But it got me thinking, if this is an issue for me, it definitely has to be an issue for other Denverites. And it turns out this is something that we are all very passionate about.
That was my next question was, so you crowdsourced, right? You reached
Yes.
out to readers and said, hey, tell me your stories. What was the response like?
Oh, it was pretty overwhelming. It was a very informal survey because first I kind of just wanted to gauge interest, but I put out a tweet and then I kind of pulled some of the Facebook groups that I'm in for different neighborhoods and people love to talk about this. That is what I found.
So true. We love to talk about weather, driving, and parking. It's like its own separate issue.
Definitely. Yeah. I talked to the newsroom too. I brought it up and they all could not stop chatting about it and like throwing ideas out there. So I was like, okay, my editor, John, and I were like, okay, there's clearly interest.
Yeah, this is something.
We'll move forward.
And we're going to get into what you heard and then we're going to hear from some of our listeners. But before that, beyond just like not enough parking, what were some prominent issues that people shared with you about parking lots here?
Sure. I would say cramped spaces.
Just like smaller.
Yeah. Tight
Tighter
spaces.
spots.
So it can make it difficult to not really to park, but to back out and not hit, another car or a shopper, God forbid.
Yeah.
What else? Just during really crowded hours, how it can be like Trader Joe's and Cap Hill is like notorious for this, how it can block traffic like coming in
because people can't get into the parking lot,
Right.
so they're backed out onto Logan,
Exactly.
which is kind of a thoroughfare through Cap Hill into Uptown.
for sure. A symphony of horns when I went whenever I go, and so it was funny to kind of drive to these different locations that people had suggested and stake it out a little bit, and really kind of watch from a reporter's perspective and not a shopper's perspective some of the issues. I would say that some of these locations, they're located in like older neighborhoods.
Sure.
And so as a result, there's not a ton of like available spaces. There might be, out in the suburbs, further out in the Denver metro. So as a result, there's like a lot of demand, not as much
For a small
parking.
It's like that beauty of density and the things we love about the walkable, denser city close neighborhoods also have to battle with the fact that we still drive a lot. and
sure.
that does not jive with like this notorious issue with like Trader Joe's parking lots. for instance.
Absolutely. I think Colorado's car culture definitely starts to clash when we think about like inner city living too.
Yeah. So let's talk about just a couple of the spots that took up the worst of the worst that you heard from your listeners. So again, Trader Joe's, you mentioned the one that's on, it's like between 6th and 7th on Logan.
Right.
There's one at like 8th in Colorado.
Exactly. In Hale.
And these, in the Hale neighborhood. And what did you hear about, anything you heard about in particular with these ones?
So they're both, because they're kind of smack in the middle of the city, parking is limited. It's kind of a widely known issue, I mean, nationally. And when I reached out to Trader Joe's to ask, because this is what I had heard from readers continuously, was both of these Trader Joe's. So we actually just decided to lump them into one versus breaking it into number 1 and number 2. But yeah, I reached out to Trader Joe's, and their team knows they did an entire podcast episode themselves on it, where they said, we don't purposely try to make our parking lots like this. So they're aware of it, and they've addressed it. And what they have said is that when they fill spaces, like previously occupied spaces, they sometimes, the parking doesn't really
match
exactly
a grocery store.
Right.
I mean, I think that's a really common theme here that you saw in this list, right? It's like Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, King Supers, and Cap Hill. I mean, that's like probably one of the most notorious ones, but it's because they're grocery stores. There's a lot of folks hitting those up at all hours. And it's just an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, definitely.
It's like where we go regularly, and it's a grocery store.
And I think people made a lot of different points when I was surveying Denverites. For cyclists, they say this actually encourages them to ride their bikes to the store because they get to avoid the madness. People in Cap Hill especially, some are very adamant that, we shouldn't be using cars if you're a resident there. But then other people are like, well, if I'm doing a big shopping day, and walking 10 blocks with, all these juices and coffee creamers and liquids, then it's, that's just not feasible, like for them, according to their opinions. So it was just interesting to see. I don't think that I expected such a litany of opinions around this, but it's a hot topic.
It kind of harkens back to a time before the big box grocery store where we had grocery stores in our neighborhoods. And this still applies to some neighborhoods where you would walk to get, this is sort of like I think about this as like a New York state of mind where you walk a couple blocks to get your groceries every day or two versus the suburban big haul once a week or once every 2 weeks. But we're kind of caught in the middle of this urban suburban thing in Denver where we're doing both of those things, maybe.
Definitely.
But it's just an interesting observation of human behavior too. Another one I found really interesting was the Botanic Gardens has this lot, and it's really interesting because it's multiple levels. So you think like it's a pretty good amount of space, but based on the amount of folks that they see come through their gates, especially for big events, there's just no way that they could keep up with it. And it's created this situation where I thought it was interesting. I feel like the Botanic Gardens made a comment to you that was like, well, we just recommend folks give themselves plenty of time to park it there or the surrounding neighborhood. Yes. And I'm like, the neighborhood must hate this.
Well, and it's I feel like, especially on the weekends, that's when I drove through. It's so heavily trafficked on the weekends. And even trying to go down that street that is right in the middle of the entrance. So there's on the right, there's the actual Botanic Gardens, and then on the left is across the street is the parking garage.
So it's like there's York and Josephine, which again are much like Logan, 2 thoroughfares through the neighborhood. But so people also are kind of speeding.
Yeah.
Even though there's tons of pedestrians.
Definitely.
And tons of cars.
Oh, you see so many people walking on the weekends. So it's like that's kind of an added factor of the fact there's a parking garage, but there's so many pedestrians. And so that's, I think, an added issue that had it help make the list.
It's just like sometimes it's like what's the most frustrating.
Right.
You know, it's beyond just like not enough spots. But like, I feel like the REI flagship store that was on your list, this hits me as the most frustrating because it's just like, I don't know what's going on in here. The person I'm behind doesn't know what's going on in here. And, you know, like all social rules are out the window.
Definitely. And that was also a weekend hotspot. A lot of people, I went through like some of the Google reviews too after this was suggested by a bunch of Denverites. And when they talk about parking, I mean, that's what gets a bunch of 1-star reviews is parking, I guess, alleged bike thefts from customers who say that they've, you know, like left their bikes on the back of their van or something and they come back out after a couple of hours and it's just vanished. People being surprised, I guess, by fees for parking, although that doesn't kick in until after 90 minutes. But I guess if you're coming from out of town, maybe from outside of Denver, and you come in and you spend a couple of hours and you come outside and you're like, oh no, $20.
And I will say that's sort of an old Denver mentality a little bit is like, because with growth has come more people and we equate that with these things that are actually pretty normal in big cities, which is paying for parking. But like, I remember when they instituted it at the Cherry Creek Mall, it was just like massive uproar. And it's like, I mean, I kind of get it. It's like, it should maybe disincentivize you a little bit to drive and find another way to get there. But if not, you'll pay to park there. That's just kind of the deal.
And people have not let that go. I
No,
heard
they
that.
have not.
I heard that a bunch too.
They're just like, remember when? And you're like, but we just have to deal with the fact that we're a bigger city now.
Right.
You know?
Definitely. And growing.
And growing. And it's going to continue to be this way. So we reached out to our listeners and readers as well. And so I'm going to read an email we got from someone and we'll listen to some comments from folks as well. But we heard from Eric N. said the Rolling Pin Pizza / former Pinche Tacos parking lot on York Street. Incredibly tight everywhere, almost impossible to get out of your spot. And if any SUV has parked behind you and if people aren't parked to the very front of their spot, you might actually not be able to pull forward and get out of the lot.
Oh my gosh.
And I think he's kind of talking about, again, this is a dense urban area that maybe wasn't made for not only the amount of traffic, but the size of our cars.
For sure.
I thought that was funny. We've got a voicemail?
Let's hear it.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Michael and I live in Capitol Hill. And I think the worst parking lot would have to be Trader Joe's on Logan. Because it's usually a line of people trying to get into the parking lot. And if you're lucky enough to get a space, then you have the opportunity to come out to try and get out of the parking lot. So there's a line of people trying to get out of the parking lot. The worst. Can't get in, can't get out.
I love his point. Like, I've been in that exact situation where you're like, I'm just trying to get out so you can get in. Let me out.
Yeah, that is what made it number one on the list. Well, that and several. I just think the sheer amount of times that I heard that, I was like, it belongs no place other than number one. But everybody has their own grievances, although they seem to follow the same trend.
All right, let's hear another voicemail.
Hi, my name is Nick Raymond, and I live on the corner of like Uptown, Five Points, and the Business District. And worst parking lot that I have seen around here is on 22nd and California. It's like this huge, massive lot, and it's never full, even on a Friday or Saturday night. There's like a couple breweries nearby, but there's still so much street parking that I want to say max I've ever seen it is like 30% full. It's huge. There's a ton of other really small parking lots nearby, and it's so ugly. So yeah, hope that helps.
So he's talking about something totally different, which is another issue we have here, which is like privately owned parking lots have their own rules. And so you will be in somewhere in a neighborhood where there's nowhere to park and there's a giant lot that's empty that's like, if you park here, you will be towed. And I think we've talked about this with Jill Locantori from Denver Streets Partnership. Her dream is to like, how do we get those lots in use so that, I mean, at least get some of this traffic and this stress off the road because these lots exist.
Yeah.
Did you hear it from anybody like from that angle?
So I had talked to the city, and this didn't make we were trying not to go like 100 inches on this story, since it, has to fit in the newspaper too. So this didn't make the final cut, but, I had spoken with the city, and the city was talking, the city's point, when it came to parking, was that they keep hearing from Denverites that they want it to be more walkable.
Mm-hmm.
So as a result, they're not focusing on, building a parking spot for every
Right.
person, because they say that, with a lot of the new development, especially downtown, for instance, these developers are already building, additional parking on top of that. But I mean, it's a fair point. I mean, to think about, outside of grocery stores and corporate parking, the actual, private parking. I do think it's funny that on my way to this, to recording this, I had my own parking issues, and I was like, this is so appropriate, trying to navigate your parking garage across the street, and the spots there were too cramped, so I'm just circling the floors, running late. So it actually couldn't have been more timely.
Do you feel like it's now just like a thing where you're just like, I think about this all the time. I know
truly.
I am part of the problem.
It does make me feel vindicated for having written this article.
Well, and he mentioned something too, or you were just talking about, when you were talking about with the city of Denver talking about this issue and developing new buildings. And we actually had an expert on, an urban planning expert, Ken Scruple, a couple of weeks ago, where there's a push to make it so developers don't have to put as much parking, because parking ultimately, some argue, ends up costing renters more because it's taking up space that could be used on a property or a lot as more housing. And so that's one of the other, which feels counter, I think, to a lot of times when you think like less parking is only going to make it worse. But it is that sort of changing people's habits by forcing thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
By forcing the environment, changing the environment to force our behavioral change, which seems tough in this city.
Definitely. No, and that's a really interesting point too.
And we have one more? Oh, it's an email. Okay. Oh my gosh. This one is it's funny. It's okay. Let me just read it to you. It's from Chelsea. She said, when I was pregnant and postpartum, I spent so much time at Belly Bliss in Cherry Creek. It's an amazing place, but the parking situation, so bad. When I was 8 months pregnant with a huge belly, someone parked so close to me that I had to crawl in through the trunk of my car.
Oh my gosh.
Another time when I was pregnant, I had asked someone who had just parked to move their car so I could get in. It worked for her too, because she had her kid in the backseat and couldn't open the door to get out. Help moms out. We physically need more spaces for these dang kids.
That is crazy.
It's crazy, but I also want to, I've had that exact experience as a pregnant person, but I'm also thinking about my friends with disabilities. The way that like accessible or handicap spots are laid out is sometimes confusing to folks that don't use them. So they'll like park up right next to it, and then someone opens their van door and they can't get their ramp out to get their chair out.
Yeah.
So it's really like the accessibility piece is sort of a hidden issue within this issue. But yeah, I can't imagine climbing 8 months pregnant into my car through the trunk. Chelsea, I'm so
Poor
sorry.
thing.
We feel you. Well, is there anything you took away from this conversation, Megan? Like I know you're probably thinking about parking differently, but did you learn anything new about the city? You're a neighborhoods reporter. Did you learn anything new about the city?
I think what I took away actually was the perspective from outside of the city, because you would think that originally this list was just supposed to be for the city proper, but we got so much engagement from people in the suburbs, in Arvada, in Lone Tree, that we had to add at the bottom, okay, let's throw a few in for the suburbs, because we heard from them about issues that they even have with big box stores like Costco, and cannot forget, of course, the insight that we got about Red Rocks, which I truly felt, because it's like every time, I mean, I think this is such a Denver experience. Every time you leave Red Rocks, it's like, will you get out in an hour? Will you get out in 3 hours?
You
who's
have to
say?
You have to plan for getting out in your car, because it's like, depending on where you're parked, maybe all of a sudden the line to get out of the lot is right in front of you and you have to beg someone to let you in.
Right.
And then all these lots are pouring out into these small dirt roads in some spaces. And it's another great argument for this push for public transportation to Red Rocks.
Yeah, no, definitely. In looking into the issue, I definitely made sure to mention that in the article because it really makes you think like, okay, there has to be a better way, right?
Right. Like, what is our limit? When are we going to push ourselves to be like, we have to change this, you know?
Yeah, and it's hard on something that's public land in a way.
Totally.
They can't really, build, I guess, around it. So we got to think of other alternatives.
Can you imagine, though, if they'd like built a parking garage there in the 70s or something? It would be like such a bummer, but also like.
That's horrible to think of.
It's horrible to think about. I don't want that
Parking
in any
garage
capacity,
among
but
the rocks.
you never know. It could happen, but my hope really is that we get
let's hope not.
Yeah, the public transit option seems like such a better way to go. Well, Megan, this was so fun. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
And here's what else Denverites are talking about. Campus protests. According to 9 News, Auraria campus anti-war protesters have dismantled their encampment. The move comes after CU Denver officials moved classes online Friday, and Auraria campus leaders announced that all buildings across the 3-school campus would be locked, events canceled, and remaining classes would be held online. Protest organizers told 9 News that their focus would now shift to a, quote, new iteration of exhibitions throughout campus. We will be following this story as it continues. That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed this show, why not take a minute to tell the producer of the Trader Joe's podcast about us? Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe to our morning newsletter and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See ya! My favorite Donald Trump thing of all time was when he addressed dairy farmers as local milk people.